We're in the middle of the Gemara here on page 2a, and we did Rabbah, who gave the reason of not being able to see the schach. If a person is in a sukkah, the sukkah is so tall, so your eyes do not seem to dwell on the schach, on the roof, and therefore, based on the pasuk that it says that you have to know that you're dwelling in a sukkah, so Rabbah says that that's a problem if it's too tall, if the schach is too tall. So that was the first answer of the Gemara. Then the Gemara had Reb Zera's answer about dwelling in a sukkah, that the schach is not really accomplishing anything, or that the either the schach, either you don't need the schach or the schach isn't really doing anything. But basically, if it's too tall, what is the roof? How does the roof protect you from the sun? If it's so tall up, the sun comes through the sides. And the shade that you have in the sukkah basically giving you shade when from the sun, because the walls of the sukkah are basically blocking the sun. So Reb Zera said you need a sukkah that's not as tall. Then the schach is actually protecting you from the sun. But when it's such a tall sukkah, the schach is not really doing much in a sense of protecting you from the sun. So that was Reb Zera's reason. And then we spoke about Ashtarois Karnayim, that were the question of Abaye, that if you build a sukkah where there's a valley with two big mountains right near it, right, that blocks the sun, that's also, you're not getting any shade from the sun. And the Gemara answered, yeah, but that's an external problem. Here, it's an internal problem. Here, the sukkah itself is basically not accomplishing anything. There, it's an external factor. The mountains are blocking the sun, so your sukkah is not really accomplishing. But if you wouldn't have the mountains, the schach would accomplish something. Here, it's basically not, the schach doesn't work at all. It's too tall, and so the schach has zero. It's accomplishing nothing, and that would be a problem having a sukkah that too tall. And I think that we're gonna the place where we're up to is Virava, um, which is the final answer of the Gemara, and it's about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Virava Amar. Rava gives a third answer having to do with a sukkah being a diras arai. It has to be a temporary dwelling, not a permanent dwelling. So that's the answer. Before we do this final answer of Rava, so let's just think about the other two answers that we gave. So the first one is Rabbah, the second one is Reb Zera. Rabbah's answer was that you need to actually see the roof, or you need to be able to, you need the roof to have some type of a, not just seeing it, maybe you would gaze on it, you will spend time looking at it. And if it's too tall, you're not going to do that. If you face upward, you'll see it. But person normally doesn't face upward, and therefore basically not concentrating enough on the roof. Now he learns this from a pasuk. What is the pasuk that he learns this from? L'man yedu derisechem. It's a pasuk, I think in Parshas Emor, that you need to dwell in a sukkah in order that yedu derisechem, that the future generations will know ki basukais, that in a sukkah hoishavti es bnei Yisrael, I commanded the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs. that you should know that I commanded the Jewish people to dwell in sukkahs, meaning that future generations should know when they're in a sukkah that I'm commanding them to dwell in the sukkah. They should know about this, because they should know that they're in a sukkah. That's not the simple meaning of the verse. The simple meaning of the verse is that generations in the future will know that I commanded not that I commanded you to dwell in a sukkah, that I placed you in sukkahs when you were in Egypt. After you left Egypt, where did you dwell? So you dwell, there were clouds of glory surrounding you. And how are you going to remember about those clouds of glory? Because I'm commanding you now to dwell in a sukkah. And you'll remember when you're dwelling in the sukkah that I commanded you, that I made for you this great, miraculous sukkah. And when you left Egypt, you were dwelling inside clouds. So how are you going to remember that? If you dwell in a sukkah now, you have to know that you see the roof. That's not the point. The point is you're remembering that you were surrounded by clouds, right? That's the simple meaning of the pasuk. Future generations will know that I placed you in sukkahs when you left Egypt. I placed you surrounded by clouds. Now, there's another meaning as well. It's an argument on page 11 about if it really means the clouds, or it also means that the Jewish people dwelled actually in huts when they left Egypt. In other words, they would build little huts. Hashem arranged for us to have that we had huts that we lived in, during when we left Egypt, and so the pasuk could mean that the generations should know that Hashem supplied us our needs, and He placed us and arranged that we would be able to build ourselves huts in the rainy season, especially for the rainy season when we left Egypt, and so or for the winter season, yeah. So we basically dwelled in these actual huts, or we dwelled inside these clouds of glory. However you learn on page 11, that's the simple meaning. However, Rabbah says that in addition to the simple meaning of the pasuk, it also refers to your actual dwelling in a sukkah, that it has to be in a way that you know. Why does he learn this way? So one of the commentaries says something interesting. He says the word deresechem in the pasuk is missing the vavs. Vav is a letter that's sometimes left out, just like the word sukkah. Sometimes the vav is left out in most of Chumash. You don't have the vav in the word sukkah. Our Gemara puts the vav there, but in Chumash you don't have the vav. In Tanakh, whenever it says sukkahs, almost always it doesn't have the vav. So deresechem also is missing that vav. Sometimes the vav, because it could be pronounced the same way with the vav or without the vav. So in the Chumash, it happens to spell deresechem without the vav, and maybe without both vavs, and therefore, it's missing both vavs in the Chumash, and therefore, there's another way of reading it would be diraschem. Instead of deresechem, you could read it diraschem, and that would mean in order that you should know about the way you're dwelling that I commanded you to dwell, you should know about this dwelling that I commanded you to dwell in the sukkahs. So basukkahs hoshavti literally would mean I placed you, I resided you in sukkahs. But the way Rashi understands it is basukkahs hoshavti, I commanded you to reside. And now if you include the first part, in order that they should know their diraschem, their dwelling, you should know your dwelling, that I commanded you to dwell in sukkahs. So you basically can learn from there that it means you have to know that you're dwelling in a sukkah that's above 20 amas. You don't know that you're dwelling in it because you don't see the schach. So you don't really know that you're dwelling in it enough. And therefore it has to be below 20 amas, below 30 to 40 feet. The roof has to be below that. So you see that you're dwelling in such a sukkah. So that would be the way of understanding that why the reason of Rabbah that it's learned from this pasuk. So you basically have a pasuk that teaches us that it has to be within 20 amas. And again, what I'm adding to what we learned before is exactly why he learns this way, not the simple meaning of the verse. So I'm answering a question that seemingly the verse doesn't mean this, and I'm bringing you from one of the commentaries that he says that really it should have said Doirei Sechem with the vavs, and it spells it differently. It's missing those vavs, giving you the option of reading it Diraschem, and therefore he learns this drasha. He learns this way of expounding it to add this new law that a sukkah has to be within 20 ames. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, who argues on that, doesn't agree with this way of expounding this verse, and he would say that it's the simple meaning of the verse is the way it is the way to translate it. But Rabbah says no, you also have to translate it this way because of the way it's spelled, and he learns out this the insight that it has to be within 20 hours. Now, Reb Zera, that would jump to Reb Zera. Reb Zera said that you learn it from a pasuk in Yeshaya, which is interesting in general. Normally, we don't learn things from the verses in the prophets. Normally, divrei Torah midivrei Kabbalah lo yalfina. We normally don't learn laws from the writings and the prophets. We normally, if it's a law of the Torah, it has to be written in the in the Torah itself. In here, the Gemara, according to Reb Zera, he's learning it from this pasuk in Yeshaya, which that itself is somewhat of a question, and that leads us to something that Ezra mentioned, that maybe this is really a halacha l'maisha misinai, and the pasuk is called an asmachta. That would be, that would be one way maybe of learning this. That at least according to Reb Zera, I don't know if you would learn that in Rabbah, and I don't know if you would learn that later on in Rava's interpretation, but at least in Reb Zera, maybe you could say such a vart that really the Gemara is saying that this is, of course, a law that's a biblical law. It has to be within 20 amas, and maybe he learns that it's a halacha l'maisha misinai. It's maybe a law, and he sees a hint for us. A lot of times you find that there's a smachta means like a hint or something to rely on, or a little something like a secret that's revealed in the prophets, and that would be that it says over there basukos. It says vasukatia letzel yoima mecherev. It says over there the sukkah will be for some type of a shade during the day from the heat, and basically you learn from there that it has to give shade, and he learns this idea that if it's too tall, it's not really giving shade, or you don't need it for shade. Different ways of learning exactly the problem of Reb Zera. Rashi uses the word that ain't tzarech schach, because the walls are so high, you don't need this roof. The roof doesn't, you don't need it. You have the shade from the walls, and therefore you don't need the roof, and that would be the problem. So initially, that's the Gemara's understanding, or Abaye's understanding, and then the Gemara asks the question from about the Ashtrois Karnayim city, where you have this valley, and on that the Gemara says that if you would remove the external factor, then the schach would work. In here, if you would remove the walls, then it would not be called a sukkah. Different ways of translating that. Rashi uses the term, its name would be voided. It would not be called a sukkah. What that means could be that if it doesn't have walls, it wouldn't work. So you need the walls, and if you have the walls, then you don't need the schach, you don't need the roof, because the walls are blocking the sun, and basically it's not. Or you could maybe translate it a little differently, that it's if you remove the walls, the schach is not even working. It's not accomplishing. Not that you don't need the schach. The schach doesn't block the shade below, and therefore it's not working, and it's not called a sukkah, and therefore you need a sukkah with shade. If it's above 20 amas, it's not giving shade, and that's the bottom line that Reb Zera's problem. Now, so I just explained that maybe you could learn, like Ezra said, maybe that it's maybe a halacha l'maisha misinai. We'll see a little later in the Gemara about how you'd have to tweak that a little and fit it in. The simple understanding, however, is not that way. I would say the simple understanding of the Gemara is that we're learning from Yeshaya that what the word sukkah means. We're not learning a halacha from Isaiah because you can't really learn halachas from the prophets, but it's more revealing what the word sukkah means. And the word sukkah, we have it reveals to us, it tells us what the actual meaning is. The meaning of the word sukkah is that it has to be something that gives shade, and that's the purpose. That's the purpose when it says in the Torah of Sukkah that we should have a sukkah of 7 days. It must mean a sukkah that gives shade, and that would be the meaning of how you could learn something like that from Isaiah. Someone had a question. Yes,
Yeah, me. Aren't we learning halakha from Megillus Esther?
So you can learn rabbinic laws. Rabbinic laws you can learn, but you can't learn a biblical law based on the Tanakh. So those are the two answers of Rabbah and Reb Zera. We spoke a little about we spoke on Friday about the difference d'oraisa, d'rabbanan. We got into that a little, and we went over the understanding of why the terminology by sukkah is a little different than it says by mavoi, and we got into those some interesting little insights about that with regard to if a Mishnah is supposed to tell you how to make it kosher, or it's just supposed to tell you the law of if it's kosher or not kosher. We also spoke about if biblical laws are talking about the item, and the item if it has spiritual powers to it or not. And rabbinic laws generally are about the person. The person is prohibited or permitted to do a certain thing. And we explained that could be a difference between the way the wording is. If you say a sukkah is puzzle because intrinsically the sukkah is not a kosher sukkah, it's not bringing the holiness. And when you talk about a person lowering a mavoi, that's about the person, what he's supposed to do or not supposed to do, but not intrinsically if it doesn't have an impact on the intrinsic laws. And we mentioned how that could apply to other laws of the Torah with regard to if a person sold something non-kosher, that's rabbinically prohibited or biblically prohibited, and so on. That was another thing we discussed. Now, one of the questions on this Gemara on Reb Zera is, what does the pasuk really say? What is that pasuk? What's the full reading of the pasuk? So it says, Sukkah ti el etzel yoimam. The sukkah should be for tzel, for shade during the day from choyrev, which is heat, ulamachsa ulamistar, some type of a refuge or protection, mizerem umimatar. Zera means from a stream and from rain. And simply the meaning of that of the wording would be that it should protect us from the sun and from the stream of fire and from the rain, which will be when Mashiach comes, that Hashem is going to punish the wicked, either with this fire or with this rain, and Hashem will protect the righteous with a sukkah, with some type of a hut, a protection over Yerushalayim and over the tzaddikim, protect them from the sun, from the fire, and from the rain. That's the simple meaning of the pasuk there. Now the problem is that if this is a sukkah that's protecting you from the rain, so it sounds that maybe you should have a roof that protects you from the rain, and if not, it's not called a sukkah. What are we learning according to Reb Zera? According to Reb Zera, we're learning that the sukkah needs to protect you from shade, it needs to protect you from sun, right? and therefore it needs to have shade, and over 20 amas, it doesn't have shade. That's basically the Gemara's understanding. But look at the pasuk. The pasuk is saying it has to protect you from rain also. Now, how about a sukkah protecting you from rain? What are you talking about? The whole idea of sukkah is that it's temporary. It's not going to protect you from rain. It's going to every sukkah it could rain through. That's the common understanding of a sukkah. If you made it like a house that it protects you from rain, then it's not a sukkah, it's not kosher. So how could we learn this from a pasuk in Yeshaya that basically says a sukkah is supposed to save you from rain? Oh, I wish we could have sukkahs that would save you from rain. They don't. The sukkah is made temporary. So how do you learn that? How do you learn that pasuk there that it's saved? That we make a big deal and emphasis. It has to protect you from sun. And according to this, if a sukkah is over 20 amas, it's not protecting you from sun. It's not kosher. But what about the fact that the pasuk says it's supposed to protect you from rain? If you make a sukkah that's protecting you from rain, seemingly that's not a kosher sukkah, right? And maybe we'll learn more about it soon. But how do you learn the pasuk? So the commentaries explain that if you look at that pasuk, it says 3 words of protection. One is sukkah. A sukkah is going to protect you from the chayrev, the dryness of the heat, the humidity. It's protecting you from the chayrev, from the sun. And then it says another word of protection, machse umistar, another type of protection and covering from, it says, from the zerem and from the matar. So the understanding of the Gemara is that sukkah is for shade, the mechse and mistar is for fire and for rain. So the sukkah doesn't say it protects you from rain. Sukkah protects you from the sun. The other things protect you from the other words are used for protection from the other elements. And therefore, the Gemara is understandable why it's emphasizing that the word sukkah emphasizes the shade part and not necessarily, it doesn't show us that it's supposed to protect us from rain. That's the at least the way the commentaries explain it. Now, the next explanation of the Gemara, we're going to now start. So we're about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Rava Amar Mehacha. Rava says from here. And here he's going to give us a third reason why a sukkah, according to the rabbis, is puzzle if it's more than 20 amas high. If the schach is more than 20 amas, 20 cubits high, why is it puzzle? And Rava says it's from here. You learn it from a pasuk.
Not cubits, amos.
Amas, excuse me. Okay.
The cubit is a tefach.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No.
Oh, wait. No.
Cubit is an ammo.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So in any event, I'll use the word amma to make everyone happy. So the sukkah above 20 amas is puzzle. We already learned 2 reasons. Now we're hearing a third reason, and that is V'rava amma mehacha. Rava says from here, Basukais teshu shivas yamim. In sukkahs they should dwell for 7 days. And Amra Torah. So again, this is another verse in the verse right next to the verse of Laman Yedu. Right next to that verse that we learned that Rabbah used as a proof it can't be. So this is another pasuk right next to it. Again, I think it's in Parshas Emor, this week's Parsha. And it says, Basukas Teshu Shivas Yamim, you should dwell in the sukkah for 7 days. Now, Amar Torah, the Torah says, Kol Shivas Hayamim, all 7 days, Tsemi Diras Keva, go out of your permanent dwelling, V'shev B'diras Arai, and dwell in a temporary dwelling. So Torah says that you're supposed to dwell in a temporary dwelling. We see that from the fact that it says, Teshvu Shivas Yamim, dwell in it for 7 days. But one of the commentaries says it could have said, Taduru Shivas Yamim. The word actually, Taduru means like to live in it for 7 days. But here it just says Teshvu, sort of like sit in it for 7 days. It sounds like it's a temporary dwelling. Or possibly just from the fact that it says 7 days, instead of different ways of wording it. Maybe it could have said, could have switched around the words. In any event, Rava is learning that from this pasuk, you see that it has to be temporary. So the Torah says you got to leave your permanent dwelling and V'shev b'diras arai, and dwell in a temporary dwelling. And so if you need to dwell in a temporary dwelling, the Gemara says, then your dwelling of 20 amas high is not a temporary dwelling, that's a permanent dwelling. Let's read it inside. Ad Esr Mama, until 20 amas, Adamaisa dirasi dirasarai. Person would make his dwelling a temporary dwelling if it's under this 20 amas or under. Lamaila Miasr Mama, but above 20 amas, Adamaisa dirasi dirasarai. Person would not make his dwelling temporary. Ela diras keva, would make it permanent. And the reason why he would make it permanent would be because you would need to strengthen it because it's so high, and otherwise it would fall. And therefore, when the pasuk says make a dwelling, dwell inside a place, this sukkah for 7 days, we're understanding it to mean that it has to be temporary, and over 20 amas would not be temporary. Now the Gemara asks, Amalei Abaye, again, Abaye is bothered with this, and he asks, Elamiyata, if so, asa mechitza shel barzel, the person made mechitzas, walls of barzel, of iron, v'sikech al gaban, and he put schach on top of them. Hachinami delay havi sukkah. Would this also mean that it's not considered a kosher sukkah? And the reason he's saying that is because we just said it has to be temporary, and if you make it out of iron, your sukkah is quite permanent. And so how can we say that you're fulfilling the mitzvah if you made it out of iron? So the Gemara answers. The Gemara answers that Amar Le Hachi Kamina. He says, this is what I mean to tell you. Ad Chafama, until 20 amas, the Adamaisa dirasi diras arai, a person makes his dwelling a temporary dwelling. In other words, if a person builds something up to 20 amas, which is normally could be considered temporary, ki avalei diras keva, even if you made it permanent, nami nafik, you also have fulfilled your obligation. You go out of your obligation, meaning you fulfilled your obligation. L'mayla mechaf ama, above 20 amas, the other diras keva, that you must make your dwelling a permanent dwelling. You can't make it temporary. So then, ki avalei diras ari, even if you do make it a temporary dwelling, and it will fall, but nevertheless, it's not good enough because you made it in a size that's called the diras keva size, and it's called a permanent size. So even though you made it temporary, but you made it in a permanent size, and even if you do that, even if you make it temporary, nami loy nafik, you're also not fulfilling your obligation because the size is what the Torah is getting at. Meaning, the Torah says you have to dwell in a temporary dwelling for 7 days. There are different ways of understanding what that means. You need to dwell in a temporary, a 7-day dwelling. Now, it could mean that your dwelling has to be a dwelling that is going to fall apart after 7 days. You could try to translate it that way. You could or translate it that it has to be a dwelling that has a size that's called a 7-day size, a temporary size, a 7-day type of size. But what would come out of that is, but you can't make a dwelling a size that's called a permanent size. And a permanent size would be above 20 amas. A temporary size would be anything 20 amas or below. That would be a temporary size because that size is a size that you can get away with making temporary, and it will not fall apart. It will not blow away, and it will not fall over, and it would be safe. So the way the Gemara is understanding is that when the Torah says 7 days, a sukkah of 7 days, it means the size. The size has to be a size that would make sense for 7 days. That, in other words, that would be a temporary size. You have to build it in a way that's a temporary size. Now, if you want to learn the other way, which the Gemara doesn't, if you would want to learn that maybe it means you need to build it in a way that it's a temporary dwelling and you cannot build it out of metal. Maybe that's another, maybe you want to learn it that way. How does the Gemara know to learn it this way, that it's talking about the size, that it has to be a temporary size and not a permanent size? It doesn't say it clearly in the Torah which way to learn it. And when it says you should build it the 7 days, you could possibly want to learn it the other way and say it means that you should dwell in a sukkah that's a 7-day sukkah, and it's not made out of metal. Maybe you could learn it that way. And Tosfos, of course, asks this question that even though you could translate it meaning to be a sukkah that's not fit to dwell in only for 7 days, and if it's made in a permanent way, maybe like if you made it out of metal, even though it's below 20 amis, maybe that would be a puzzle invalid. And Tosfos answers that the pasuk implies that it's really coming to teach us the size of the sukkah, not the material of the sukkah. Where do you see that from? Tosfos says you see it from the verse. The pasuk implies that it's telling us a size of a sukkah. It should be a temporary size, but not a temporary material. So one of the commentaries says it means that because the Torah should have clarified that. If it wants you to make it a material of 7 days, then it should have said it. Because it doesn't clarify that, therefore the Gemara understands it to mean that the size of it should be a size that would be a temporary size. And therefore, even if you made it out of metal, it's kosher. However, if you made it above 20 amos, then it will not be kosher because that's a permanent size. So even if you made it temporary, but you made a permanent size sukkah, and that's what the Torah is coming to tell you, that a permanent size sukkah is puzzle. Another way of translating this and understanding this is that if you want to translate it to mean a material that which is a 7-day material, the understanding of it, or a 7-day sukkah, the understanding would be that it would be a sukkah that would fall apart after 7 days. How could you build a sukkah and so exact that it's going to fall apart after 7 days? That would be impossible to measure it, that this is a sukkah that will fall apart. You can't really, no matter how flimsy you make it and how strong, it would be hard to adjust it to be a sukkah that's going to last 7 days and not more. And therefore, the Gemara understands it to mean that the size has to be a size that's generally used for temporary 7-day type of thing. And that gives you, it makes it more practical, and that the Torah would command us to do that instead of commanding us to do something that's almost impossible, to build a sukkah that's going to last 7 days only. It just wouldn't be feasible to command such a thing and to expect people to be able to build such a thing. So that's another way. So either because the Torah doesn't specify what it means, the Gemara understands it means the size is a temporary size, or because or it's because it wouldn't be feasible to command us to make a sukkah to practically of a 7-day sukkah. So it must mean that the size has to be a size that's meant for 7 days. And so that's the understanding of the Gemara. Now, Tosfos asks a very interesting question based on the Gemara we learned in Tainus. What did we learn in Tainus? That you can't ask for rain, or mention rain, I should say. You can't mention rain on Sukkot, according to Rabbi Yeshua there, he says, because you don't want it to rain, because rain is a siman klala. It's a sign of curse if Hashem doesn't want us in the sukkah, right? The Tosfos says, what do you mean? if you can make, if you can, you're as long as the size is a temporary size. So why don't you just make a sukkah a temporary size under 20 ames and make the schach nice and solid, tie it, nail it in, and in this way you won't have rain in the sukkah. As long as it's under 20 ames, it's considered okay. It's a temporary size, right? In other words, until now, before Rava said his point, we understood that the sukkah has to be a temporary dwelling and it's going to rain inside. But now Rava comes up with this new idea that it's not that the dwelling has to be temporary, it's that the size of it has to be a temporary size. Okay, so we'll build a sukkah that's a temporary size. It's under 20 ames. And build it with nice and solid schach. You can nail in the schach and make it nice and solid. Is law, and have you could even have metal walls if you want. And basically, it's not going to rain in the sukkah. So why are we calling the sukkah a sukkah? It's a curse if it rains during sukkahs. It's no curse if it rains in sukkahs. You could actually have a sukkah that's a permanent dwelling, as long as it's under the size is a temporary size, and then then it doesn't rain in the sukkah. So what does the Gemara mean in Tainus? That if it rains during sukkahs, it's a siman klala because you got to leave the sukkah. No, you don't have to leave the sukkah. You sit in the sukkah. It's fine. It's not. It's not impacting you at all. So the Gemara in Tainus seems to imply, or the Mishnah, I should say, in Tainus implies it can't be such a permanent dwelling, and the rain was going to fall in the sukkah, but Taisvis is saying from our Gemara, it sounds like no, it's not. It really not it's not necessarily so. Maybe you could build a sukkah that's permanent and it's not going to rain inside. I must tell you, there's practical application to this discussion, because nowadays there are ways, they've figured out ways of making the schach, like bamboo sticks that are inserted one into the other, almost like a roof of a house. And you could insert them in a way that the rain rolls off and doesn't fall in the sukkah. Now, if you insert them in a way that's like perfect, even though they're not nailed, or that you're not building a house, a regular roof, but you're putting them in a way that the rain will just fall off, would that be allowed? Would you be allowed to have a sukkah? Now, Taisvis's answer to this question is that even if our Gemara is emphasizing that the walls could be permanent. Taisvis says, however, the roof of the sukkah definitely has to be temporary. And Taisvis says that that's also the understanding of the previous opinion, Reb Zera, that Taisvis says, that pasuk says that the sukkah protects from the rain, and that was the question that I asked a little earlier. He says, the pasuk there says that the sukkah is protecting from the rain. Seemingly, according to that, it should mean that you're not allowed to have rain falling in the sukkah. And Taisvis's answer to that question is that no, that the schach for a sukkah definitely has to be temporary. And there's no question about that. The only question is the walls. Our Gemara is only talking about the walls could be made permanent. But obviously the schach for a sukkah, it's impossible to learn that the schach could be permanent. The schach definitely has to be temporary, and that's the dwelling 7 days. It's a temporary dwelling, but the walls could be a size that's permanent size. The walls could be permanent as long as the size of the sukkah is a temporary size. The walls could be made of permanent material. The size, But when it comes to the schach, there's no question that the schach has to be a temporary schach, and it has to rain, and it has to be able to rain in the sukkah. So Tosfos, according to this, Tosfos holds that that schach that I mentioned to you about would not be kosher. If you built your sukkah in a way that you have bamboo sticks that are cut in half, and this way you can build, you could put them in positions that they would roll, the rain would roll off and not fall in the sukkah. Seemingly, Tosfos would hold that that's not kosher. There's a big debate about this in the halacha. However, Tosfos seemingly would hold that it's not kosher because the schach definitely has to be temporary, and that's the way. According, and if that's so, the way Tosfos is explaining it, he says that's the answer to the Gemara in Tainus, that the Gemara in Tainus says that the sukkah, that you should not mention rain on Sukkot because it's a siman klal, it's a curse if it rains on Sukkot. And the reason why it's a curse if it rains on Sukkot is because every kosher sukkah could rain. It will rain. Well, the rain will be felt inside. Now, some sukkahs maybe are a little thicker, some thicker roof, some are thinner, so some you'll feel the rain right away, some you'll feel the rain after 20 minutes, but ultimately you'll get the rain, and that makes the sukkah a kosher sukkah. According to Tosfos, if it would not, you would not feel the rain at all, and you would have it built in a way, you'd have it positioned in a way that the schach will not allow the rain in, then it actually would not be a kosher sukkah, according to Tosfos. And of course the question would be, what happens if the rain can't go in on a regular basis, but maybe a heavy rain would come in, maybe that would be good enough, or so these are the issues that are discussed when it comes to sukkahs. This is an interesting question, but ultimately the concept of having a sukkah that the rain would not be able to fall into, that according to Tosfos is not acceptable, and he sees it from this contradiction between the Gemara in the Mishnah in Tainus and the Gemara in Sukkah, where it implies that a sukkah is definitely meant that rain will fall in, and if it does rain, it's a sign of a curse that Hashem doesn't want our service to Hashem. Okay, so that gives us now also another explanation on this pasuk. I gave you an answer earlier that the pasuk in Isaiah seems to say that the sukkah is meant to protect from rain, and how could that be? And I gave the answer that I gave before was that it uses three words of protection. In sukkah, the word sukkah is protection from sun, and the word mechsa umistar, that is the word that are protection from rain. That's one answer. Now we have another answer in Tosfos, and that is that the Gemara can't learn from there about protection from rain, that a sukkah means protection from rain, because then it would mess up our whole understanding of what the sukkah is, which is that the schach is meant to be temporary. So our sukkah has to have temporary schach. It has to have temporary roof material, and the only thing that it could be permanent is the sides of the sukkah, but the roof is always for sure has to be permanent. Therefore, we're not going to learn from that pasuk in Isaiah about what the sukkah that it protects from rain, because then you can't learn that from there. It's impossible. It would negate the whole concept of what a sukkah is, and therefore we can only learn from there that about the shade of the sukkah, and that sukkah has to protect from shade. That we can learn from that pasuk in Isaiah, and that's what the pasuk is really coming to teach us about shade. That a shade of sukkah, that the sukkah means it's meant for shade, and the fact that it protects from rain, that is impossible to learn from there, because there's no way of learning the concept of sukkah without understanding that the roof has to be temporary, and so that's the way that's Tosfos's interpretation. The other Rishonim, the other commentaries, have other ways of answering this question of Tosfos, but this is this is at least Tosfos's understanding, and And it does get interesting when you come to the halachic ramifications. Another discussion based on this Tosfos was, would it be appropriate to have a sukkah that the rain can't fall in? And even though rabbinically, maybe that would be prohibited to dwell inside rabbinically, but maybe biblically, you would fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. So whenever it rains, maybe you would sit in that type of sukkah. That you, in other words, a person would have two sukkahs. One sukkah would be, no one does this, but this was at least one of the thoughts of Tosfos, that maybe a person should have two sukkahs, and one would be a sukkah that protects from rain, and that would be prohibited uh, uh, prohibited rabbinically, but permitted biblically. And the other one would be a sukkah that is that doesn't protect from rain. And so whenever it rains, would you be obligated to go into the sukkah that protects you from rain, because that sukkah is not uncomfortable to go in when it rains? And at least biblically, you would fulfill your obligation of dwelling and eating inside the sukkah. And so that would be a method of fulfilling the mitzvah of sukkah, even though it rains. And ultimately, Tosfos says that Tosfos' answer is that no, you wouldn't need to do that, because the sukkah would not be a kosher sukkah, even biblically, because if it doesn't allow rain to fall in, then it's not even a kosher sukkah biblically. So you wouldn't gain anything from dwelling in such a sukkah. That would be Tosfos' answer to his question. At least that's one way of learning the question of Tosfos, is that maybe a person should have two sukkahs. Okay, in any event, we're going to continue with we just concluded this side of the page 2. We're on page 2b now, and we'll turn the page. And the Gemara wants to understand. So we have 3 reasons. We have Rabba, we have Reb Zera, and we have Rava. These are the 3 explanations of why a sukkah above 20 amos is puzzle, is invalid according to the rabbis, according to the first opinion of the Mishnah. Reb Yehuda argued on this, and he said it's kosher, but the opinion of the rabbis of the Tanakama, the first view, is that it is invalid if it's above 20 amos. So we have 3 reasons: Rabba, Reb Zera, Rava. Now the Gemara wants to know why don't they all agree on the reasons? Yes, David.
In the Steinsaltz Gemara, he brings from, let me just bring this up, where it says that the sukkah for shade, sukkah tia letzel, he says, this is from Rabbi Aaron HaLevi, and he says, Tosfos, this is the meaning of the pasuk. The sukkah provides shade, and he says 3 things: it provides shade, it provides shelter from the storm, and it shields from the rain.
Right. So yeah, so we mentioned that's what we mentioned, that one way of explaining that pasuk is the word sukkah is specifically from shade, and the other words protect from the other protections, shield and protect. Those have to do with the storm or the fire, at least according to Rashi's pshat there, and the rain as well. So in other words, the word sukkah protects from shade. Is that what you were saying? In other words, you were just bringing, because we mentioned that earlier.
No, I wasn't emphasizing the shade part. I was emphasizing the shields from rain part, because it's not necessarily stopping the rain. It's just shielding from the rain.
Uh-huh. And do you think that's what he means there? That it shields, but it really lets rain fall through? Is that the way is that what he implies?
That's what I was thinking, that this is what it means.
Uh-huh. That's a nice shot. I don't think that's what he means.
He brings Tosfos. I don't know if you have I don't have the Tosfos in front of me from that particular part of the Gemara where it says sukkah tia letzel.
Mm-hmm. What does he say? Which Taisvis he's referring to?
It just says Rabbi Aaron Halevi
Yeah.
and
So
Tosfos.
seemingly he is quoting the Ritva who brings the Ra'ah, and Rabban Halevi is the Ra'ah, and there they bring from Taisvis, but in other words, it's not written in our Taisvisin. And that explanation that they bring, if it's the way I understand it, is not explaining it the way you just said it. It's explaining it that each word is emphasizing one type of protection. So the word sukkah protects from shade. The word mechsa, which you translated as shield, protects from the storm. And the word mistar, which is blockage, another word for protection, is from the rain. And so if our Gemara is trying to find what the word sukkah means, the word sukkah means from shade. That pasuk actually talks about shielding from other things as well, but that's not translating the word sukkah. Sukkah specifically translating the word shade, and that's the way I learned it. I did see this in the Ritva, and that's the way that's the way I understood it. The way you want to translate it, I don't know if it would work, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't know if his translation of shield. First of all, I don't know if shield means it gets through, it just shields you a little. I don't know if there is such a concept. Shield means it shields you, or is there, or in the word, the Hebrew word. No, the question would be what the Hebrew word is. Now, the Hebrew word that you're dealing with here is mistar. And mistar to me sounds like it blocks completely. It doesn't sound like it blocks only partially. So it's not, even though you're translating it as a shield and protection, but if it says protection, seemingly it's protection from rain. The Hebrew word is not necessarily protection. I mean, mistar, it seems like it blocks completely. And so that's why I wouldn't have learned it that way.
Like if you have a roof on your house, you wouldn't say that the roof shields you from rain. You say that the roof blocks the rain. Where if it was like a porous roof where the rain can get through, then you might say that it shields you from rain.
Uh-huh. I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. I don't think that's the meaning of that commentary, and I don't know if you could fit it into the Hebrew word. But anyway, it's a nice interpretation. Maybe we could look up that pasuk. What you could do is look up the pasuk in Yeshaya and see. And I'll tell you why I don't want to learn it that way. I'll tell you another reason. Because when Mashiach comes and we get this great blessing where we're protected, do you want full protection for the tzaddikim, which we hope we're part of, or would you be satisfied with just a semi-protection? Right? I think we would like the tzaddikim to get full protection. But the way you're translating it is that it would actually only give a partial protection from rain. That means the tzaddikim are going to be sitting there and getting some rain, and they're going to get some, I don't know. So that's another reason why I don't know if I would like to translate it that way. You get what I'm saying? Like, do you want the tzaddikim to be sitting there and it's partially raining on them and getting their Gemara dirty and getting their clothing and they're uncomfortable and so that would be another reason maybe not to translate it that way. Okay, Yisrael.
Yeah, I was going to mention that in Sefer Yonah, there's reference made to sukkah, not in the context of the mitzvah, but in terms of the meaning of the word sukkah. It seems to me relative to shade, at least in that particular setting, it's more related to shade than it is to protection from rain.
Right. You're saying based on what? Why are you translating it that way? That it means more shade than rain?
Because the emphasis was on the heat of the sun and protecting Yonah from passing out from the sun heat.
So in other words, the word sukkah is mentioned in the book of Yonah, and there it emphasizes from shade from the sun as well.
That's my understanding.
Interesting. The question would be, why didn't our Gemara bring a proof that it means shade? That's interesting.
Good question. Part of it.
That's a good question, Yisrael. I'm going to consider it your question. Why doesn't our Gemara bring a proof from Yonah? It's a good question. We'll have to see if any commentary mentions that. Do you have the actual pasuk where it says over there the word shade? Okay, that would be part of the.
Not with me. I'd have to go dig into my
Okay,
scroll.
okay. Okay. Anyway, good point. Yes, Mordechai.
Rabbi, it's at the very
I'm
end.
sorry.
Yeah, that thing you mentioned about do you want the tzaddikim to have only partial protection? It reminds me once in Country Yossi magazine, there was something about like new simoning for the first night of Rosh Hashanah, and he said put a raisin on a piece of celery so we can have a raisin celery. And so then the next month, there was a letter to the editor, make it half a raisin on the piece of celery, so we can have a raisin celery. To which Country Yossi replied, "Who wants half a raisin?"
Okay. Yes, Ezra.
We get it.
Yeah. You want to add to this insight, David?
Well, I was going to translate the word mistar to be makom shesoter. So it's a place that pushes away.
Right.
Which
would mean solid, right? Seemingly solid, right?
That's the way I understand what mistar is,
Right.
Just it's a breaking, express understanding what the actual shorish is of the word.
Right. Secluded, like total seclusion. Okay. Anyway, that's those are the good thoughts and questions, but I think that's the meaning. Okay, let's continue. So we're on page 2B now, and if you're in the article, I'm pretty sure it's going to be 2BA. I don't have it in front of me, but it pretty much has to be that way. 2BA, 2B1. Oh, sorry, 2B1, 2B1. Okay, so Kulu Karabale Amri. All of them do not agree with Rabbah, meaning the other Amoiraim, the other commentary. We had 3 answers. They don't agree with Rabbah. Why? Hahu Yediyah L'Dairos. Because that pasuk is Yediyah L'Dairos, as I mentioned when we learned it, at least when I mentioned it today, that pasuk, it's a little hard to translate it the way Rabbah translates it, because the simple meaning of it is that it's a pasuk talking about future generations should know that I put the Jewish people up in a very good hotel, a very nice place, either huts of these huts that protect, that in the desert, or in in this great clouds of glory. And so that pasuk is really telling us, dwell in a sukkah, so that you'll remember that I put you in these huts, or in these protection from in these clouds of glory. Now, to say that it means you have to know that you're dwelling inside a sukkah, that's a little pushing it. We gave an explanation why Rabbah wants to learn that way, but not necessarily do you have to agree with that. So that's why the other rabbis didn't want to learn from Rabbah's pasuk. They also do not want to say, they don't say like Reb Zera. Why also do they not say, why do they not say like Reb Zera said? Reb Zera was the second reason about the shade. Because that pasuk about the shade, which we were just talking about, that's talking about for Yemais HaMashiach, that Hashem is going to make a sukkah in the time of Mashiach for sale, for shade, for pleasure, for protection. But it's not talking about a sukkah of the mitzvah of sukkahs. And maybe the sukkah of a mitzvah for the mitzvah of sukkahs, maybe that sukkah does not necessarily have to be a sukkah that the actual schach provides shade that's used by the person dwelling in the sukkah. As long as there's schach on top, maybe that's good enough. And who says that the sukkah, and therefore if it's over 20 amos and it has schach, maybe that's good. Oh, the schach is not protecting. Who says it has to give shade to the person sitting below? As long as there's schach on it, maybe that's a good enough sukkah. Reb Zera imkein lemakra v'chuppah. One second. It could be I just said something that's Let me read it inside. Reb Zera, why don't they learn like Reb Zera? According to Reb Zera, the pasuk should have said chuppah should be for sale. That a chuppah should be for tzel yomim, and it should be some type of canopy for tzel. My v'sukkah tiyel tzel yomim. I'm sorry. Let me read this one more time. Reb Zera, what does Reb Zera do with their claim? We said the other rabbis don't learn like Reb Zera because it's talking about in the times of Mashiach, in the days of Mashiach, where sukkah is going to be for that's what the sukkah for the days of Mashiach is going to be, protection. But the sukkah's mitzvah maybe doesn't necessarily have to be for sale. So how does Reb Zera learn it? Reb Zera, question mark, what does Reb Zera do? So my answer is in Cain, if so, you want to say that it's only talking about Yemais Mashiach and not talking about the sukkah of the mitzvah, in Cain, if so, then let it say the chuppah will be for sale, for protection during the day from the heat, and which use the word chuppah. My sukkah tail will tell you, why does say the word sukkah? To emphasize that the mitzvah of sukkah is also learned from this. Shaman Minatarti learned both from this. We're going to stop here. It's 11:02. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rebbe.